welcome back to Conduct Detrimental. We have a breaking pod today, believe it or not, on a Monday. It's a holiday, President's Day. Dan, what's happening?
Yeah, I'm still disappointed we only get one President's Day. I'm old enough to remember when I had off from school for both Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday. So this 50% diminution in federally recognized President's Days still taking me a while to get adjusted to. And I'm working today, except for this moment when we're doing the podcast. So it's a good time to step away from work and kind of talk about the big issue this week.
Yeah, the big issue is Darrelle Revis in his arrest and his charges and what's going on with that, and really, we want to not only talk about what's happening in the Darrelle Revis case, but we want to give you guys a preview of the preliminary hearing this week. And the preliminary hearing itself is a little bit deceiving in name because Dan and I both were talking about this over the weekend. We really think this is an important point, an important turning point in this case to see, what's going to happen in the future. And there's all sorts of wide-ranging implications that may happen. And Dan, I think you'll agree that, Thursday's preliminary hearing is going to be something else.
Yeah, we're talking about the specter of live witness testimony. It's almost like a grand jury proceeding, but not done in secrecy. It's held in the courtroom, and we're going to hear competing versions of the story. So in a sense, as you aptly put it in your notes to me earlier, it is almost like a mini trial, although it's not the actual trial. And whether the case goes forward to trial is really going to hinge on what takes place this Thursday. We should hear from live witnesses. Some of the five witnesses who are named in the criminal complaint, maybe even Darrelle Revis. So this is not your ordinary run-of-the-mill initial court appearance. This is actually, there's a lot at stake here. Yeah,
absolutely. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we do want to just kind of briefly go over the facts. And, I pulled these from the criminal complaint as well as, the Pittsburgh Department of Public Safety statement. And so here's what we know. On February 12th, which was last Sunday, but this is 2:43 a.m., so in the early morning hours on
nothing
Sunday.
Nothing good ever happens at 2:43 a.m.
Yeah, it's shocking when you hear these stories that you can almost assume it's going to be after midnight at some point. But on that day, this alleged victim spots Revis on the sidewalk, it seems, and he runs up to him. He has his cell phone running. He asks him if you're Darrelle Revis, and Revis says, I am, presumably. He's filming it. Revis apparently gets agitated at some point, snatches the cell phone away, and tries to delete the video, although apparently he did not delete the video. The video is still on the phone. And another man who seems to be on the side of the first alleged victims, as these were the two that ultimately were injured in the incident, shows up, tries to get the cell phone back, and at this point, Revis allegedly throws the cell phone into the street, and a big verbal altercation ensues. And then a fourth man shows up, who now appears to be on Revis's side, and further complicates this situation. And I think that the first person who is filming's cell phone video is going to be one of the really key features, obviously, in this case, because it's going to show who provoked who. Revis has an ongoing theory of self-defense, apparently, according to his attorney. We'll get to that in a minute. But
if he didn't throw a punch, which is what his attorney is alleging, how could he allege self-defense? So I think one of the big mysteries that will hopefully become unraveled Thursday is who threw the punch.
Yeah,
and somebody sign him up for the UFC.
Yeah, there was a video released, I think yesterday by TMZ, and again we'll get to this too, but it showed the two men just kind of laying in a pile, like they had really been knocked out. And again, we don't know who punched them, but somebody hit them. Apparently they had been laying there for about 10 minutes completely unconscious until the police showed up, and they awoke to the police kind of being there with them. There were potentially other videos, potentially other witnesses. We don't totally know the full extent of all of that. But what we do know, according to the statement by the Pittsburgh Department of Public Safety, is that the officers reviewed a cell phone video, we're not sure which one, and confirmed that it was Revis involved. And I think that's an important point as well, especially for this preliminary hearing.
Yeah, I mean, a critical detail from the criminal complaint from Officer Anthony Burke, who spoke to the witnesses, but he reviewed the video. Which video he reviewed, I don't know. It's not made clear in the criminal complaint, but he did mention in his affidavit of probable cause that Rivas was that the video showed Rivas becoming hostile towards Cousins and his friends, and the two victims are Dallas Cousins and Zachariah Jarvis. There's a third person that Rivas, according to the criminal complaint, approached and said, "Do you want to be next? I've got more guys, more people coming." And that third witness is Nathan Watt. So the critical question is who threw the punch, and we still don't know.
Yeah,
the punch is.
Right. And so fast forward to last week when Rivas was charged with 4 categories of felonies, I believe 2 of aggravated assault. But the first one, and we're going to kind of go through these one by one because I think they deserve a little bit of discussion on what goes into each one. But the first one's robbery. And that one, obviously, none of these charges were fully explained by the facts, so we're going to speculate a little bit here. But robbery was likely to do with him snatching the cell phone away and ultimately throwing it into the street, which seemed to do so in a hostile manner. And the penalty for robbery is up to 20 years for a felony robbery in the state of Pennsylvania.
Seems kind of flimsy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if any of these are going to fall, it's these first 2, the robbery and the terroristic threats, which is not a terror threat in the sense of you may think with national security, but more so along the lines of a threat to harm another person. There may be more evidence of that based on these cell phone videos. We'll see. That's the least serious of all the charges. Is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The 2 that are, I think, going to be the most worrisome for Rivas here, first are the aggravated assault. And that's obviously, if he was the one that punched somebody, it has to be something that causes seriously bodily harm to another individual with an indifference for human life. And I think, whoever threw the punches here, assuming that there's no self-defense element, it can make a pretty compelling case that aggravated assault was committed. And then I think a really interesting aspect of this is the last one, that's the conspiracy. So the conspiracy claim basically is that Rivas and his friend were in cahoots, and even if his friend punched the individuals, Rivas, if he is found guilty of conspiracy, has the same penalty as the person that actually threw the punches. And so, again, even in this scenario, if the big question is who threw the punches, it may not matter if he can be found guilty of conspiracy here.
Yeah, but wouldn't you need some kind of an agreement or, overt planning? This thing seemed to have unraveled so quickly and spontaneously. If this was just simply one of Rivas's friends having his guys back, I don't know if this rises to the level of a conspiracy. But what's really damning for Rivas here is even if he didn't throw the punches, he fled the scene. Didn't call 911. Does he have an obligation to call 911? No, I don't think so. But fleeing and running, which was the eyewitness testimony of the taxi driver whose name is Tom Harmon, mentioned in the police report. I think he's going to be a key witness at the preliminary hearing on Thursday because he should testify consistent with his statement to Officer Burke that he saw Rivas running away, with his friend. So whether this is a conspiracy, it's certainly some kind of accessory or aiding and abetting. I mean, there's something here. I could see potentially these charges being downgraded if Rivas didn't throw the punch. Maybe not a first degree aggravated assault, but it sounds as if Rivas was assisted by somebody, and I think Rivas's culpability may not depend on whether he threw the punch, but what the crime is ultimately labeled, I think it may depend on the witness testimony that comes out on Thursday. But this doesn't look good for Rivas, even though he may not have thrown the punch.
Exactly, and I think it makes sense now to kind of turn over to Thursday in the preliminary hearing, and Dan and I are both not specialize in criminal law, but we did a good deal of research here to try to inform you guys of what's going to happen on Thursday. Dan, you want to start off with what's going on at the preliminary hearing?
Yeah, preliminary hearing will be before Judge Jeffrey Manning in the Allegheny Court. Judge Manning is a magisterial district judge, and that's the first stage of the case after the preliminary arraignment. The preliminary hearing is the court proceeding at which the Commonwealth has the burden of proof of demonstrating that it was more likely than not, based upon the Commonwealth's version of the facts, that a crime occurred and that Darrelle Revis was the person who committed the crime. It's a very low threshold. This is not a trial. This will not determine Revis's guilt or innocence, but it is almost like a grand jury proceeding in which the judge will be vested with the discretion to determine whether the Commonwealth has satisfied its early burden of proof, which is to show a prima facie case, which, as you've pointed out earlier, is a twofold inquiry. The prosecution has to show that, based on the prosecution's version of the evidence, that it is more likely than not that Revis committed that crime. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing it. It's a much lower threshold than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's intended to determine whether he actually will face charges, and this case will be remanded for a trial.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note here, first off, the goal of these, right, is to act as a gatekeeper to keep cases out of the system and don't waste resources that have a chance of resulting in a guilty verdict or a conviction. And that's, for those of you who are familiar with civil litigation, it's sort of the equivalent of a motion to dismiss, right? Here, the judge has to take everything that the prosecution is telling them as fact as they present it. So they're going to present witnesses, other forms of evidence, and he's going to have to assume that that's all true, assume that the witnesses are all believable, and assuming all of that, do these charges hold up? Now, it's important to remember this is not the trial, right? So at the trial, later on, Revis will have more of an opportunity to rebut all of this. In fact, here he will be able to, his lawyer will be able to cross-examine the witnesses, present his own evidence, and sort of rebut what's going on. But the standard is whether or not the evidence as presented by the prosecutor meets the bare minimums of the charges filed.
Yeah, normally this would be sort of a no-brainer. He'd get, he'll move on to a formal arraignment. He'll plead guilty or not guilty. But the release of the video through TMZ and the serious questions as to who threw the punch make Thursday's hearing, interesting from the perspective that it's not, preordained that Judge Manning will, throw the case or remand the case to trial. I think as a result of the witness testimony, there's a potential some or all of these counts are dropped or downgraded. So the recent events or the recent facts that have filtered out as to the unknown identity of the alleged assailant, may be exculpatory for Darrelle Revis, and it may be a difficult climb for the prosecution to not only gain a conviction, but to to satisfy this low threshold even at a preliminary hearing.
Yeah, and I think another thing, another unique aspect of this preliminary hearing is that the evidentiary rules are lessened. Yeah. They're actually barely there compared to what's going to be happening in a trial. And the really important point here is that hearsay is allowed. So what they frequently do at hearings like this is they'll trot up the arresting officer, and that officer will be allowed to testify to everything that he heard from talking to all the witnesses, and the judges will have to accept those as true. And that's that's kind of wild because it takes away Revis's opportunity to confront those witnesses, which is obviously a constitutional issue in trials, but at this early stage it doesn't come up. So there's been, and Dan, I think you did a little bit of research on this, but there's been some recent litigation on whether this is fair or not.
Yeah, well, you hit on you hit the nail on the head. The constitutional right to confront your accuser. That's a right for trial. It's not a right in connection with a procedural or a pretrial, procedural hearing. So the Pennsylvania Superior Court in the Ricker case from several years ago held that there was no constitutional right under federal constitution or federal constitutional law or the Pennsylvania Constitution to confront your accusers at a preliminary hearing. So the upshot of this case is that you could have an arresting officer or the officer who's the complainant who wrote the report just simply reading from his report and testifying as to the communications and statements that he took from witnesses. He can almost mail it in. And the entirety of the Commonwealth's case, at least at the preliminary hearing stage, could be based solely on hearsay testimony, which is just an unbelievable thing until you recognize that the right of confrontation is a right at trial, not a right early on in the prior phases of the case.
Yeah, and there's some benefits to this proceeding for Rivas for sure. I think the most important one is, even assuming that the prosecution meets its burden here, which in my opinion it almost certainly will, he's going to really gain an inside edge into what their strategy is, what the weak points are of the prosecutor's case, and they'll be able to kind of plan for trial or maybe even use those as a negotiation tactic in a plea bargain later. He's also going to be able to call his own witnesses. They're certainly going to highlight the self-defense defense. And he'll also be able to cross-examine some of the witnesses that are there, assuming that they're called by them. And, in a criminal proceeding, this may be his only chance to cross-examine those people prior to trial and lock them into certain testimony that they can then use. They can get the transcripts from that and then lock them into that testimony during the criminal trial.
Yeah, it sets the tone for the entire case, and I'm not sure how many witnesses are going to be trotted out there on Thursday. You have one witness who less than a week ago was knocked out cold and has a broken or a fractured orbital bone in his eye, and you have a second witness who suffered a similar fate, was knocked out, but both declined medical treatment. But if there are these many witnesses, there are up to 5 witnesses, 6 witnesses identified in the police report, I would expect to see all or some of them testifying at the hearing, particularly the neutral witnesses, such as the taxi driver who witnessed what he believed was Rivas and another man fleeing the scene. So we're going to have some witnesses, and they've been identified and named in the criminal complaint. So tracking them down will not be a challenge. Whether they appear voluntarily or not, I have no idea. But I think Thursday's hearing will likely not rely wholly on hearsay testimony. I would expect that we're going to hear from at least several of the witnesses identified in the complaint.
Yeah, and as far as witness testimony goes, I think that's a great summary right there. And I think in addition to that, we're also going to potentially hear or see multiple videos here. We don't know all of them that exist. We've seen now the TMZ video, as we mentioned earlier, which shows the 2 people knocked out and some person yelling. You can't see them; they're off camera, yelling, "I knocked out both these expletives out, both of them. Shut up before I knock your expletive out next." When he was talking to apparently a third person that showed up on the scene, we don't know who that is. Rivas's attorneys have denied that that's him. Who knows?
So is Brandon Marshall. Every credible person, I don't know credible, but every individual who's weighed in on Twitter or in the press, even members of the media like Mike Florio and Matt Chatham from Patriots Country, people who've been around Darrelle Revis a lot, have unanimously, there's no dissenter among them, have said that's not Revis's voice. And if that's not Revis's voice, it's more likely than not that the punches were thrown by somebody else.
Yeah, but I think the interesting aspect of that is the Pittsburgh Department of Public Safety statement that said officers have reviewed the cell phone video and confirmed it was Rivas. So were they relying on
confirmed his identity or confirmed his throwing of the punches?
Here, I have the statement right here. I'll read exactly what it says. If I can get it open.
God, I love doing a show on criminal procedure.
Yeah.
It's just a new watermark, a new threshold in our burgeoning podcasting career.
Right. All right, quote unquote. Here we go. The officers reviewed the cell phone video and confirmed that the person was Rivas. So that to me says that they're either sitting on a separate video or they made this assumption that the voice was him, but I can't imagine that they would do so. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's going to be, I think, really the big evidentiary question moving forward. I mean, if we have a video of him there, that'll be something different.
Well, Dan, we know that the officer ID'd Rivas as being the person on the cell phone video because in the police report earlier in the night, the same officer, Anthony Burke, while he was on foot patrol, I guess Pittsburgh's, a small downtown area. You do foot patrol and you run into Darrelle Rivas and you recognize him. And then a couple of hours later, a couple of, people at 2:30 in the morning are walking on the street and they recognize Darrelle Rivas. So it's clear that Rivas's image appears on the cell phone video. What's not clear is whether any video captures him acting physically aggressively towards somebody else. We know he was sure as hell annoyed. He get away from me, get away from me. He was getting agitated.
Yeah. I agree.
And then,
so to the wild extent card of that video, right?
Yeah, the wild card is like some second person, emerging out of nowhere. Was he with Rivas all along? Will Darrelle Rivas identify him? Will he be named and brought in as a witness? Why would somebody show up at a preliminary hearing to take the fall for Darrelle Rivas? I mean, talk about having a fall guy.
Yeah, absolutely, and that will be a narrative to follow, and I think from Rivas's and probably also this other person's perspective, they're still going to argue he may be a fall guy, but the fall guys, I'm sure, are going to argue self-defense, that they were not the aggressors, that these other guys came after them first and they used a proportionate amount of force to defend themselves, which will remain to be seen. And I think, to the extent that there's other witnesses there as well. I mean, this sounds like it was drawing a scene, so we may see, other witnesses that were more neutral, not affiliated with either party, which are obviously very strong testimony. Some of the other things that struck me from Rivas's attorney, Robert DeGreco Jr.'s statement, where he mentioned that we have. There was a reference to clothing in there. And so my thought is that in the videos that we're going to see maybe, or are going to come out, they're going to be able to prove by what Rivas was wearing that evening that he wasn't the one that did it. And then also that they're going to try to potentially someone, a voice verification expert, to come in and prove that the TMZ video wasn't Rivas's voice, which I think is the popular opinion now, but who knows?
Why do we need a voice verification expert? We have Brandon Marshall. I mean, isn't that enough?
Yeah.
Right. What's remarkable about the unfolding of the events is that there are so many people who arrived on the scene, who witnessed it, who took cell phone videos. 2:30 in the morning in downtown Pittsburgh. Very few people, I would think, are out, and there are 3 victims. There's a taxi driver. There's a woman who observed what was going on, but so much of this, I think, might come down to a matter of timing. Did anyone actually see the punch? It seems as if everyone saw the aftermath of 2 men knocked out cold for 10 minutes. But a real a hurdle for the prosecution or a hurdle for the Commonwealth is that even the victims don't know whether Rivas punched them.
Yeah.
And that's remarkable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the third person there, the third person who was with them, who didn't get knocked out, said that it happened so fast he didn't know if it was Rivas or the other guy. What started out as really troubling and potentially career-ending for Darrelle Rivas, I think over the past couple of days, I think the mood may have brightened in Rivas land. That doesn't help his NFL career. It says nothing about the discipline he may face from the National Football League. But from the tone of the last couple of days, the worst thing he could be accused of is maybe being a jerk and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because if he didn't throw those punches, we're talking about really responsibility for somebody else throwing the punches.
Yeah, that's obviously a much tougher standard, but I don't think it's out of the question here.
No, it's not. I agree.
And, we mentioned earlier the robbery charge. I think you put that in front of a jury, it's going to be tough to convince them that that's sort of the thing that happened there. But at the same time, I still think that there's a lot going on here, a lot that we don't know.
Sure.
And on Thursday, a lot of it's going to be revealed. We're going to learn a lot more about what the prosecution's case has and what it doesn't have. And I think that, I'm sure Rivas' attorney is very good. He's going to try to do his best to poke holes and all of that.
Yeah, Joey Porter's lawyer. I mean, he's the local fixer in downtown Pittsburgh. If you're an athlete, if you're a celebrity, you hire Robert Del Greco. I took a look at his website bio. He's a partner in a decent-sized law firm in Pittsburgh, and his entire representation history lists athletes and celebrities. So he's the guy to see if you're an athlete or a celebrity in trouble in Pittsburgh. And he's done very well in getting charges dismissed, getting charges downgraded, and even getting acquittals for his clients. And he may be I thought this would be a very difficult case for him, but may not be as difficult as the Joey Porter case. But Rivas was obviously realizes what's at stake here for him professionally and personally. Not only a loss of his career, but a potential loss of liberty, and sitting on contract values in excess of $10 million a year. You don't cut corners with legal representation. You hire the best. And, this lawyer sounds like he is, the best person to hire for this type of defense.
Yeah. So with all that said, Dan, what do you put the odds at that the charges get through Thursday? Not an ultimate, guilty finding or anything, but just gets through Thursday.
I would have to agree with you, Dan, and I think something sticks. Maybe not all 5 counts, but we're looking. Okay, forget robbery. I'm even somewhat skeptical of the first-degree aggravated assault charges. Maybe they could be downgraded to second degree, but at the very least, I think we're looking at terroristic threats because Rivas was hostile. At least the police report indicates that he acted in a very hostile way towards the victims, and if his voice, if there's sufficient evidence, if any of the eyewitnesses from this police report said it was Rivas making threats, well, regardless of whether Rivas threw the punches, the terroristic threat misdemeanor charge alone should carry through to go to trial. So I'd be shocked if these charges are dropped after Thursday, and I think there might even be it might be too controversial for Judge Manning to do that. But I would expect to see some kind of dilution or diminution of these charges. They're going to go from either a first degree to second degree, or some of the counts are just going to fall away, and maybe potentially new ones are added.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that can happen on Thursday, and moving past that point, as you mentioned earlier, I think we get to the formal arraignment stage where Rivas will be asked to plead guilty or not guilty. And then from that point, the sides can negotiate a plea bargain, which, again, would be another opportunity for, charges to be lessened in exchange for, agreeing to plead guilty to them. So,
but Dan, Rivas does face a critical decision, professional versus personal. To plea bargain to anything, to accept any responsibility criminally for what happened last weekend, really would jeopardize the balance of his NFL career. Because if he pleads guilty to a felony or even a misdemeanor involving violence, I mean, he's going to face a significant suspension, even if it's not a full season suspension, even if it's just 4 games. He might go on that sort of, unofficial forever suspended list that Ray Rice is on. And it doesn't help Rivas that his age is sort of catching up with him. His last year as a member of the New York Jets was the worst year of his career. He's not exactly in great demand. And he may not be signed as a free, even if he were to be cleared of all these charges. It's not a given that he would be able to continue his career, especially not under his current contract value. But he's got to be careful, because if he pleads out, that simply gives Roger Goodell free rein for any punishment that Roger Goodell sees fit. So he's also thinking about not only his own livelihood and liberty, but how this could impact what little remains of his career.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and to me it's kind of a no-win situation. Like you mentioned, the Jets have a relatively low guarantee on him next year. His performance decline. They're thinking about moving him to safety. I think it's probable or possible at least that he gets cut. So let's just play it out. He gets cut by the Jets. These criminal charges are hanging over his head. I mean, what team is really going to want to take a risk, and especially one that involves a high dollar number, on a guy who could be coming back, who could be facing a jail sentence, who could be facing a hefty suspension from the league? They're not going to want to rely on that kind of player and put a big monetary investment in him. And so, whether he pleads out for no jail time, which I think, is probably something that could happen here, and then gets suspended by the NFL, it makes him very unmarketable. And if he risks it, then he rolls the dice on the criminal justice system, has this hanging over his head, and is still someone who's not marketable to NFL teams. So kind of either way he swings it, it's not good, unless obviously more comes out to prove his complete innocence or complete self-defense here.
Absolutely. And then there's a third alternative, Dan. He could very well end up in purgatory, the so-called exempt list.
Right.
I mean, the preliminary hearing is not going to take place until Thursday, but the trial could be months away, and he may not be able to clear should he choose to fight these charges and take the case to trial. It may very well linger into the 2017-2018 offseason, and he could very easily, be given the Adrian Peterson treatment. But I guess that's a little bit better than the Ray Rice treatment. I mean, Ray Rice never got another look in the NFL, and if the Jets cut him, there's no point of even having the exempt list. If he's cut, he'll get his $6 million. I think his contract for 2017 is guaranteed for $6 million, and the Jets would probably take that hit. So what's really at risk for Revis isn't so much playing next year, but the remaining contract value. Because I don't see him catching on with another team. I mean, his performance last year was just way below Revis-like standards, and he was one of the most picked-upon cornerbacks in the NFL. He was averse to tackling. He lost some of his nerve. And trying to play a new position, you're talking about making a sizable investment in an over 30-year-old defensive back to play a position he's never played before when he's got a $6 million guarantee coming. So I think all signs point to Revis maybe facing the Ray Rice treatment from prospective NFL employees. But then again, just like with Ray Rice, it all comes down to what's on the tape.
Yep. Great point. And I think he's also has the threat of, if he gets cut, running into the Johnny Manziel or the Ezekiel Elliott treatment of the NFL takes a very long, and the domestic violence stuff is different. I think the NFL is really trying to take its time on those, which on one hand is good, on the other hand is a little suspect. But I would imagine they would move quicker in a situation like this, but it still has a chance to drag out for a long time. And teams, right, we're just about to start free agency, right? Teams are going to spend their money. They're going to want to fill up those cornerback positions. I disagree with you. I think he's still a good enough player to be, a starting corner or safety in the NFL. My favorite team, the Chicago Bears, have a pitiful secondary. We could use him even at this age. So I think there's going to be a desire for him out there, maybe not as a $15-20 million player as he once has been, but at least as a guy on the roster. So but with the NFL having a history of dragging their feet, and the free agency period coming to an end and the teams spending a lot of their money, it could have, like you said, the Ray Rice effect of them waiting alone.
Yeah, I think with free agent money and the salary cap and teams pushing up against the salary cap, there's not going to be much money left to give Darrelle Revis an extravagant contract. Certainly, if he's willing to play for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, something really low, a team might give him an opportunity to play. But these decisions on whether to blackball a player are never discussed overtly. They just happen, right?
Yep.
One of the Al Jazeera four, I forget his name, the player player from the Packers who wasn't really suspended. He just signed with the Jets.
Mike Neal.
Mike Neal, right? He was out for the entire year, even though he was free to sign with just about anybody. Ray Rice hasn't even gotten so much as a training camp tryout. So there's a de facto exempt list, which is essentially owners not wanting to take the heat from signing a controversial player. But again, to look at it from your perspective and from the player's perspective, if he didn't hit anybody, then this is overly damaging to his career for no reason. At most he's guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if he didn't throw punches, at worst, you're talking about somebody who is maybe disrespectful and a little bit of a dick to his fans who approached him on the street. But look at it from his perspective. If you're by yourself at 2:30 in the morning and you're being approached by strangers who are trying to film you, it's annoying. But it doesn't give him the right to be the aggressor physically and to throw punches at them. So really, I mean, his career hangs in the balance of what is actually on any videotape. And without a videotape showing that he threw punches, and without witnesses remembering who threw punches, I think he's going to be able to either obtain an acquittal if this goes to trial, or successfully plea bargain this down to a misdemeanor and minimal jail time. If he didn't throw punches, then this is an overblown criminal story.
Yeah. And one aspect that we haven't talked about yet, which I think is just completely inevitable here. Obviously, if the evidence comes out strongly in Rivas' favor, maybe not. But there's also going to be a civil trial here, most likely. And, we've seen this frequently now, in the two other athletes that are very much in the news right now. DeMarcus Cousins, the recently traded DeMarcus Cousins, and Matt Barnes, who allegedly is going to be waived as part of or cut as part of the DeMarcus Cousins deal. Both were involved in a nightclub incident where they were accused of punching people, and within a week there was a civil trial, a civil lawsuit.
I think it was the first business day after the alleged assault
filed against them. So
but they can't serve him. They haven't been able to find Matt Barnes.
Yeah, they served Boogie somehow. They found Boogie, but Matt Barnes will also be criminally charged in that case. So, but not to get off on that tangent, but I just see that happening here almost certainly as well. They didn't get medical treatment, but they were hit pretty good. Obviously, Rivas is an athlete that has resources, which equals money bags to everyday people and lawyers that want to represent them in these cases. So that's something to kind of keep in mind looking forward.
Victims have to be careful here. If they file a suit too quickly before the criminal proceedings really get underway, they're going to be accused of trying to shake down Darrelle Revis. There's a statute of limitations. And there's no urgency on the part of the victims to file a civil suit tomorrow, next week, or even later this year. It would probably serve them best if they were getting sound legal advice to hold off on any lawsuit filings, because they'll have a strong case if Rivas is charged and is convicted of any type of assault or making a terroristic threat. The civil case will obviously at some point be settled, but it will hinge in great deal on what happens in the criminal setting. But it would be a mistake for them to file a suit too quickly. I mean, the Barnes-Cousins scenario was a little bit different in that the civil lawyer actually filed the lawsuit to kind of light a fire under the New York City Police Department to arrest these guys. And it may have been successful, at least with respect to Barnes. But no such pressure exists in the Rivas case. He was already criminally charged, so there's no purpose for filing a civil lawsuit to advance any kind of criminal prosecution, because that's already in play.
Yeah. That reminds me of and another one we talk about frequently is the Derrick Rose case, obviously, and
you missed that, don't you?
Well, the plaintiff in that case was accused frequently of trying to shake him down, and whether that's true or not is not what I'm trying to get at here. But The point there being is that they were running up against the statute of limitations on the civil counts while the criminal investigation was still going on, and so they had to file, but they were waiting because that is sort of the typical strategy you see in these cases.
Right. I mean, she waited, 3 years. I don't know how long the statute of limitations were, but she waited quite a while before filing her civil lawsuit. So I wouldn't expect to see these victims, racing to the courthouse, this week or next week. There's no sense of urgency. They have plenty of time. I don't know what the applicable statute of limitations are for charges for civil assault, civil conspiracy, and so forth. But the time for filing that will definitely come, and if they act too precipitously in trying to sue Rivas and collect money, it could undermine their credibility, not so much at the preliminary hearing, but before any trial before a jury. Because hey, you're out trying to shake down a wealthy athlete. You're looking for a payday. You come across much more credibly if you say that you haven't filed any lawsuit. And once you file such a suit, then you're accused of having a bias or an incentive to lie.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, Dan, I think we about covered everything. Do you have anything else?
No, except that I wish we were covering this on Thursday. I hope this is going to be a fun, hearing. It's almost like a trial within a trial. It's scheduled for
minimal rules, even more fun, right?
Yeah, it's scheduled for 12:30. I have a feeling it's going to last for a couple of hours, and we'll know probably by the end of the hearing whether the judge carries them forward and remands it for a trial. I wouldn't expect to see a lengthy written opinion that we're waiting weeks for. I think the wheels of justice are going to kind of move pretty quickly here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It should be a fun one to keep an eye on. I unfortunately am moving this week, so I may not be quite up to date on that, but you can all rely on @WallachLegal on Twitter for all your updates.
No, without TVs and the camera, I'm basically beholden to the docket sheet update, and I'll be at a decided disadvantage to all the reporters who are in Pittsburgh covering the trial. I've only been to Pittsburgh once in my life, and if I had a little bit more time this week, this Thursday would have been number 2. But sadly, I won't make it. But I'll try to stay on top of things, and I'll be following some of the local Pittsburgh reporters who are going to be reporting live from the courtroom. But we're going to learn a lot more about the Darrelle Rivas situation in a matter of days.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. We've mentioned this before, but we're trying to grow the audience, so we'd appreciate it if you would go to our iTunes page and subscribe, and also leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. The more reviews, the better exposure we get on iTunes. We had the last 2 episodes, we had just some fantastic guests. Peter Vesey, who didn't hold back at all. We'll put it that way, Dan. He let some zingers out. It was a lot of fun chatting with him about all his experience reporting on the NBA for years. And then, the one and only ESPN's Darren Rovell. We talked to him about a number of topics, including, how he does Twitter, his thoughts on the Northwestern Wildcats and paying athletes, and a bunch of other topics I thought were really, really interesting. He was a fantastic interviewee for us, and Dan and I both, after that one, really were appreciative of the opportunity to talk to him because he was very interesting.
Yeah. I think what's become interesting about the evolution of our podcast is that we started out focusing only on sports law, and I think we're staying true to our roots. But we're trying to expand the reach of our show and the substance of our show by covering sports industry issues, not just the dockets, not just the courts, but the business side of sports and not just the off the field legal disputes, but anything that affects the on the field. And I'm excited by the opportunity to interview guests and bring, thought leaders on the show. And we're going to do the law stuff. We're going to get into the weeds on some of these cases a little bit like we did today. But I'm really looking forward to see where we take this show. I mean, there are no limits. And I think if the audience is interested in it, if we're interested in it, if it interests us, we'll do the show. whether it's law, business, or a mixture of the two, or none of the two. So I think the future is going to look pretty bright, and hopefully we'll keep landing great guests. But we've got to keep doing these, one a week, and sometimes two a week. And I'm having a lot of fun, with this, and hopefully we'll keep doing this for a long time, and the show will get better.
Absolutely. I think this is 24, 23, 24 episodes. So we're really
Willie Mays, 24.
Piling them up. So thanks everybody for listening, and until next time, have a good one.
And Dan, good luck with your move this week.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I'll welcome you back in a few days for number 25.